welcome back everyone. We're again here broadcasting from my apartment in Queens, New York, and we're continuing our broadcast 5 days a week on this coronavirus, this c.c.p. virus. We have a great lineup today. We're going to be going first into a story that's going viral in Taiwan and has had a lot of coverage in the Czech Republic, which is the president of the Czech Senate received threats from the Chinese regime shortly before he died, just recently. We're also going to be going over some leaked documents obtained by the Epoch Times showing that the Chinese regime knew of human-to-human transmission days before they made this public and told the rest of the world. We're also going to be going into some leaked audio obtained by the Epoch Times showing the Chinese regime has a secret program to track individuals who allegedly have had contact with this virus. Now again, folks, before we get started, if you haven't already, please remember to like and subscribe. We really need your support. And also, if you're on YouTube, please remember to click the notification bell. You'll get alerts when our new videos are up. Now let's jump into it. First off, the head of the Czech Senate dies shortly after receiving threats from China. Now this is again a big story in the Czech Republic and is currently going viral in Taiwan. And here's how it goes. The head of the Czech Senate, a Jaroslav Kubera, died of a heart attack. But it's coming out now. Local media in the Czech Republic are reporting that shortly before his death, he received a threatening letter from China saying that if he traveled to Taiwan, which he was just about to do, there would be retaliation. And of course, they're not calling into question the circumstances of his death. It appears they do think it was, in fact, a heart attack. Who knows, there was something more to it. But they are suggesting that after he died, the fact that his wife found this threatening letter is what's significant. And of course, his wife went on Czech TV where she explains this letter, saying, quote, "I found it in my briefcase. It was off the board he had officially from the Senate. So I read it and I was scared, because the first letter from the Chinese embassy seemed quite threatening to me. Then I found another letter. It was straight from the castle." Of course, this is translated from Czech. Now, details of his contacts with the Chinese ambassador in Prague have also been revealed. His wife said that after the 30-minute meeting that her husband had with the ambassador, he appeared more tense, and he died 3 days after that. Now, the Czech Republic does not recognize Taiwan as being separate from China. There's, of course, a lot of debate around this. Officially, Taiwan is an independent republic. The Chinese Communist Party has no control over it whatsoever. But through its diplomacy, the Chinese regime tries to threaten pressure countries that call that into question, and of course regards Taiwan as being part of their system. Notably, the 9-dash line where they drew this map, over the entire South China Sea, now includes Taiwan. They put an extra little dash there to include Taiwan in it. Now, moving on, China knew about the virus's ability to spread, but kept silent for days. Now, the Epoch Times has reported, quote, "Chinese health officials were drawing up plans to combat the c.c.p. virus, which they knew to be infectious, days before they informed the public about its potential spread, according to internal government documents obtained by the Epoch Times." Now, what's most significant about this document is it explains evidence that they knew there was human-to-human transmission. And the document itself is not about the human-to-human transmission part. The document itself is about the plans they are forming to fight against the virus, which suggests that they might have known about this even prior to this document, which notably came out 5 days before the official announcement. Now, the c.c.p. officially confirmed human-to-human transmission on January 20th, and the document shows that this may have been known internally at least 5 days prior, because this document is from January 15. The Epoch Times continues stating, quote, "The Regional Health Commission in northern China's Inner Mongolia issued a, quote, super urgent emergency notice to its municipal counterparts, explaining how medical facilities should respond to a new form of pneumonia. The notice said that China's National Health Commission had implemented treatment and prevention measures for local health agencies to deal with the new disease, now known as COVID-19. Now, this is significant again for a couple reasons. The main one is the fact that this shows 5 days before the official announcement, the c.c.p. had documents discussing ways to combat this virus, and within the context of explaining how to combat it, noted that they had human-to-human transmission. Again, this would suggest that even prior to forming up this plan, because this is the plan, that they would have known about human-to-human transmission even prior to this, but even based on this document alone, this shows the Chinese regime knew for 5 days at least before they made this public to the world. And this is significant because this is right when the United States, as we speak, and many other countries are calling for investigations into China. And Trump has been talking about this a lot lately. Investigating whether the Chinese regime had information on this that they were not sharing to the world, which could have prevented the virus from causing as much harm as it did. And still is, of course. Now, moving on to this leaked audio. The Epoch Times has received audio files from February 14th from 3 community health centers in Beijing. And this audio includes the deputy director, surnamed Liu, taking a phone call. And he explains that the Chinese Communist Party keeps a secret list of individuals and their contacts. In other words, who they might have had contact with, which local governments and districts and cities cannot even fully access. And this is being used to place people on different lists internally, which is not even being provided openly, stating whether they are high risk, low risk, or whatever. What's interesting is that, of course, people have public health codes. They have on their cell phones or smartphones. They have green health codes, for example, saying they're safe. They have red health codes saying that they are not safe. Now, the deeper details of this are still not fully known, but it does show the Chinese regime has information on this that's not being made public, not even within China. And it's unclear exactly what type of information they're collecting on people. Now, tying this in, there's also similar things happening apparently in New York City right now as we speak. Politico reported, quote, New York is preparing to deploy thousands of state workers and others to trace the movements of those who have come into close contact with individuals with COVID-19. And so, in other words, New York City is preparing to send out state workers and others to track who has had contact with this virus. Now, this project is going to be led by former New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg, and the training of these tracers, the individuals who are going to be sent out and trace this virus and who had contact with it, are going to be trained by Johns Hopkins. Now, Governor Andrew Cuomo said on April 30th that the effort will require between 6,400 and 17,000 tracers, and he said, quote, Yesterday we tested 4,681 people who were positive. And he continues, how do you communicate with 4,681 people? Trace back all the people they've been in close contact with in the last 14 days and contact those people. That is an overwhelming scale to an operation that has never existed before. Now, Bloomberg has also commented on this, and he said that they're making a, quote, comprehensive playbook for this strategy, and it will include data collected from smartphones and apps that collect data. Now, there are a couple interesting parts about this that, for me at least, raise some additional questions. One is that if this data is going to be shared with international leaders, you can understand to an extent local, state, federal politics, understanding the spread of this virus. But international leaders, does that include China? And what does this mean when it comes to, say, individuals who are dissidents in China or who risk, being spied on by the Chinese regime? Which raises the question of what type of data will be shared. Now, of course, Andrew Cuomo is talking about sending out these tracers. Now, in his words, where he said, how do you communicate with 4,681 people, trace back all of the people they've been in close contact with in the last 14 days, and contact those people? Now, if they're sending out tracers, which is what it sounds like he's suggesting, then this would mean individuals who go and contact these individuals who have had the virus, who've been, confirmed to have had it, and then finding who they had contact with. Bloomberg adds something additional to this, though, where he says they're going to be collecting also smartphone data and also data from apps that collect data. And, of course, your smartphone collects a whole lot of data on you, as do these different apps that we install on our smartphones. Of course, I'm sure you've all logged into, say, different social media platforms and seen advertisements on things you might have been searching for in other programs or other parts of the internet. This is, of course, data among the many forms of data collected on you. When you sign up for an app and it says, will you allow this access to your microphone? Will you allow this access to your contacts, to different parts of your device? Some of that is, of course, especially with free apps, how do they finance themselves? A lot of that's being shared or sold, of course, to different advertising companies, and a lot of that is bought up by companies that maybe we don't want buying it, such as Baidu in China, They don't look at, say, national origin of companies buying this data per se. And of course, even outside of that data, the amount of information collected on you on your smartphone is concerning. Law enforcement agencies, of course, they can do a little type search of your name or your phone number, for example, and pull up your whole file, which will include, of course, which does in fact include information such as where you have been, because your GPS on your smartphone tracks that, other cell phones within the vicinity of those areas, and so on. So these capabilities do exist. They're already available to law enforcement. What concerns me personally is that, of course, the encroachment of these systems in general, but of course, the idea that they're going to share this internationally. What is the extent to which they're going to be sharing this data? And also, to what extent are they going to allow these tracers to look into this type of data? Does this mean these tracers are going to have the same access as, say, a deputy? Does that mean, this is deputy level or intelligence level access to information these individuals are going to be given? I think there's a lot of questions that still need to be answered on this. Moving on, though, the New York Post has a story saying that Senator Cotton says Chinese students shouldn't be allowed to study science in the U.S. And this is a story a lot of media had. Now, Cotton told Fox News, quote, "In the middle of a pandemic, what's the most valuable intellectual property in the world? It's the research that our great laboratories and life science companies are doing on prophylactic drugs, therapeutic drugs, and ultimately a vaccine." Now, he said it is a scandal that U.S. schools have trained, quote, "so many of the Chinese Communist Party's brightest minds." And he notes these individuals then return to China and then, use their knowledge gained in the U.S. sometimes to design weapons and other devices used against the United States. And he continues, quote, "So I think we need to take a very hard look at the visas that we give the Chinese nationals to come to the United States to study, especially at the postgraduate level in advanced scientific and technological fields. If Chinese students want to come here and study Shakespeare and the Federalist Papers, that's what they need to learn from America. They don't need to learn quantum computing and artificial intelligence from America." Of course, banning Chinese students may sound like a racial issue, and of course you could argue it is to some extent. But it's a bit more complicated than this. The Chinese regime has several different programs, official programs, even publicly announced, focused on academic espionage. Actually, on this show, I did a whole presentation on academic espionage, which you can go check out. Among the direct programs the Chinese regime has for this are the Torch program. The Torch program, in its own doctrine, talks about sending people abroad to study or bringing them back to China and having them, quote, "either return to China or serve in place." What does it mean to serve in place, and what does it mean to strategically be sent to another country to study and then return to China? They have Project 863, which is direct guidance on obtaining different technologies, high-tech, next-generation technologies for the advancement of the Chinese Communist Party. This is regarded as one of the main programs that directs the Chinese regime's use of cyber attacks for economic theft. They, of course, have technology transfer centers. Of course, what do they do with the technology after it's stolen? That goes to the technology transfer centers, some of which run under these different universities in China. They have more than 200 of them, which work as examples for emulation for other organizations that want to do similar operations. It's a large-scale thing in the Chinese regime. And of course, they have other direct programs for this. There's the 1,000 Talents program, like this Harvard professor, Dr. Charles Lieber, is of course being, accused of being part of right now. There's the Confucius Institutes, these organizations that the Chinese regime establishes at major U.S. universities and then pays the universities to host. And they, of course, do Chinese language and culture programs in line with the Chinese Communist Party's doctrines. There's the Chinese Student and Scholar Associations, the CSSAs, which are run and operated by the Chinese consulates. If you go on the CSSA's websites, a lot of times they even say this directly. In fact, I've been meaning to do a whole presentation just on them. Now, moving on, the National Review, in regards to these Confucius Institutes, says that Sweden has closed its last remaining Confucius Institute amid strained relations with China. And of course, this ties into a couple things. First off, what we just talked about, the Chinese regime's use of academic espionage. Sweden just did this. Sweden just closed down one of these academic institutions that is, of course, accused of being used for espionage. They've closed these down in other countries as well. Actually, Canada, matter of fact, has had a lot of action against these different Confucius institutes. You want to watch a good documentary, actually check out In the Name of Confucius. Again, the documentary In the Name of Confucius, which exposes these. And of course, this issue in Sweden also goes into what we talked about in the last episode, which is the Chinese regime's use of wolf warrior diplomacy, this aggressive diplomacy they're using abroad, and the fact that in a lot of countries it's backfiring. They go in and they threaten countries, and countries like Sweden now, amid strained relations with China, they are canceling programs with the Chinese regime because this friendly facade, this mask they've been putting on for decades, has suddenly fallen off. They're seeing it for what it is. Now, moving on, we have an update on this drug war. Now, Trump has ordered some military reservists to active duty to battle the drug cartels. And this is according to Epoch Times. It says, quote, "In an executive order, the president ordered Secretary of Defense Mark Esper to call up to 200 personnel from the reserve at a time to serve as part of the military's enhanced operation against drug cartels in the eastern Pacific Ocean and the Caribbean Sea." We noted previously that the Trump administration, they had sent warships, naval warships, to the Pacific Ocean and the Caribbean Sea to combat drug cartel operations allegedly trying to capitalize on the pandemic. And we noted also in a previous episode an interesting factor in this, which is that the drug cartels themselves are having trouble manufacturing their drugs. And why is that? Because a lot of their ingredients are coming from China. They get their precursor chemicals, the chemicals to make things like methamphetamine, from China. They get these synthetic drugs, things like fentanyl that's killing our youth. They're getting that from China. And of course now these channels have been disrupted, and allegedly, we're actually not being told a whole lot about this, the Trump administration appears to have had information on some operations of these cartels to increase sales into the United States during the time of this virus. And he has deployed the Navy, he's deployed the military to fight back against this. And the fact that he's bringing in 200 additional personnel suggests that something interesting is happening, which we're notably not being given a lot of information on. But of course, if we know what Trump has said previously about, say, operations, fighting ISIS, he doesn't like to detail plans before he carries them out because it says it's like giving your playbook to the enemy. So we'll see what this is once it's finished, supposedly. And Elon Musk, head of Tesla, is now being called out or praised, depending on which media you're reading, for calling these lockdowns fascist and false imprisonment. And of course, this has started a lot of debates over, well, is this fascism, is this fascist, is this false imprisonment? And so, of course, this is an opinion thing to some extent, but I thought it'd be interesting to pull from some literature on this to see whether he is right or not. We're going to be looking at The Road to Serfdom by F.A. Hayek, notably on whether this is fascist. And I'll be reading to you what Road to Serfdom says. It says, quote, "The supreme tragedy is still not seen, that in Germany it was largely people of goodwill who, by their socialist policies, prepared the way for the forces which stand for everything they detest. Few recognize that the rise of fascism and Marxism was not a reaction against the socialist trends of the preceding period, but a necessary outcome of these tendencies. Yet it is significant that many of the leaders of these movements, from Mussolini down, and including Laval and Quisling, began as socialists and ended as fascists or Nazis. In the democracies at present, many who sincerely hate all of Nazism's manifestations are working for ideals whose realization would lead straight to the abhorrent tyranny. Most of the people whose views influence developments are in some measure socialists. They believe that our economic life should be consciously directed, that we should substitute economic planning for the competitive system. Yet is there a greater tragedy imaginable than that? In our endeavor consciously to shape our future in accordance with high ideas, we should in fact unwittingly produce the very opposite of what we have been striving for. In order to achieve their ends, the planners must create power over men wielded by other men, of a magnitude never before known. Their success will depend on the extent to which they achieve such power. Democracy is an obstacle to the suppression of speech, which the centralized direction of economic activity requires. Hence arises the clash between planning and democracy. Many socialists have the tragic illusion that by depriving private individuals of the power they possess in an individualist system, and transferring this power to society, they thereby extinguish power. What they overlook is that by concentrating power so that it can be used in the service of a single plan, it is not merely transformed, but infinitely heightened. By uniting in the hands of some single body, power formerly exercised independently by many, an amount of power is created infinitely greater than any that existed before, so much more far-reaching as almost to be different in kind. Now, agree, disagree, have some other thoughts, leave them in the comments below. And of course, folks, we're going to be continuing these broadcasts 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, so please tune in. If you haven't already, please remember to like and subscribe, and also if you're on YouTube, click the notification bell. You'll get alerts when new videos are up. And again, we need your support, and of course, we really appreciate it. With that said, folks, again, please take care of yourselves, stay healthy, we'll see you next time.